And my daughter is not going to paint anymore. My daughter is not going to play anymore. My daughter is not going to make me complain anymore. My daughter is not going to study anymore. I never let her go anywhere. That day, I first allowed her to go to the square on La Plata Avenue with her sisters. It was her first time going out. I hope he shows his face, because you're not going to give me my daughter back, but you're going to pay for it.
Camila Borda, 11 years old, went out on her bicycle and hours later was found in the bathroom of a neighboring house. Her lifeless body was inside the bathtub with her hands tied, her head covered by a bag and a cable tangled around her neck. Before losing her life, she had been intimately abused by the man who looked after the property, a scruffy-looking individual who had been working there for several days, always looking out onto the street, watching the neighborhood children. That was his erratic behavior until he decided to perpetrate this sadistic event. He later claimed to remember nothing, feigning insanity so that he would be considered culpable.
I hope he doesn't feign insanity, as he's not insane at all. You don't need to be mad to do that, it seems. I hope that justice ensures that he spends his life in jail.
And
they make him suffer, let him suffer, because dead he is of no use to me. Sentence him to life and let the inmates handle their affairs. I know that they in there will help me, even if I don't know them, but let him suffer the same as he made my daughter suffer.
The name of this man was Jose Carlos Varela, a man who had recently moved to a community in Junin in Buenos Aires, Argentina. He was supposed to fulfill the role of caretaker to look after a property that was usually uninhabited. The owners were a bit annoyed that people from around would enter without permission, and so after thinking about it for a long time, they finally asked for recommendations to hire a caretaker. Then this guy showed up in the middle of November 2017. Unfortunately, they had no idea of the monster they were introducing into a neighborhood where children used to roam the streets playing. He was essentially a predator. Born in the year of 1978, Carlos had come into the world to be part of a somewhat dysfunctional family. Ruth, who was a single mother, already had 2 other children from another man. So Gustavo and Miguel were the older half-brothers of the new family member. The 3 boys, along with their mother, grew up in a house on the outskirts of the city. However, at a certain point, they had to learn to leave only the 3 young men due to the woman's death. Carlos was the most withdrawn. He was extremely introverted and spent much of his life locked in his room. One of his biggest hobbies was drawing houseplants. His brothers actually considered him to be somewhat serious but very intelligent and methodical. In his adulthood, the man made a living as a bricklayer, this being his main source of income. However, over time, he adopted other activities to earn extra money. Thus, he became a property caretaker, a watchman to put it in simpler terms. It was a very sporadic job depending on the time he was requested at the residence. He would usually stay overnight and leave as if he were the actual owner. However, there were times when he had to return under the same roof as his half-siblings. While there, he never bothered to socialize. On the contrary, he continued his usual hobbies, spending hours and hours locked up with his dog, his drawings, and recently on his social networks. No one was concerned then, but he used to add underage contacts to his Facebook pages, a glaring red flag, considering that the subject had never had any problems with the law. Even occasionally, he also left his mysterious solitude aside and went out to play soccer with a group of friends, as well as suddenly being seen as a participant in meetings of an evangelical church. He was a strange individual, but no one considered him a danger to society, although it was noticeable that at his 40 years of age, he had never shown interest in maintaining a romantic relationship with any woman. He had no known partner, nor was he courting anyone, but that's how he lived his life until he was contacted to be a caretaker of a property. He was single, hardworking, and solitary, so when he got that job offer, he had no problem accepting it. The applicant was a woman with the last name Paguela. Both she and her son Martin were the owners of the property, which consisted of a large yard full of trees and a 2-story house, somewhat away from the entrance gate. It was extremely spacious, and that's why it was easy for the neighborhood children to come in and play for hours. So, once the deal was closed, the owners handed over the keys to Carlos and he moved in. His main function, among other repair things, was to prevent intruders from continuing to go through the gate without permission, as even adults had dared to do so on some occasions, a situation that had recently sparked discussions between the Paguelas and Camila's parents. Soon, the presence of the new employee of the estate caught the attention of the inhabitants, who could not overlook his peculiar disheveled appearance. He had an extremely serious face, long hair, and a neglected beard and mustache, as if he didn't dedicate a single minute to his personal care. He looked like a vagabond.
He was a strange guy. He was constantly spying here at the gate. He would come and go. He knew how to be in the woods sitting. He worked. Yes, he worked. He approached me, rarely seen.
Jose told the owner of the local store that he came from the city of La Plata in Argentina, from where he was allegedly expelled by the authorities. This confession aroused a feeling of confusion in the store owner, as whether it was a joke or not, he decided to believe it, following his own logic that a criminal would do everything possible to maintain a low profile instead of divulging it to any stranger. In addition, he also mentioned that his stay at the Paguelas estate would be much longer than expected, as he had decided to stay in the neighborhood even after finishing his assigned task as a mason or caretaker. It was very strange that Martin and his mother had left their property in the hands of someone so unkempt and at the same time mysterious, but they could do nothing but beware of this new neighbor. Thus, in the weeks following his arrival, he dedicated himself to fixing the garden. He spent many hours pretending to work, always in front looking towards the street, as if he was very curious to see who passed by and who did not. He even reached a point where he didn't even try to pretend to do something. He just sat and looked outside. What was so captivating about the outside? That's the question. Maybe the children playing in the street. Among them was Camila Borda, a pleasant 11-year-old girl who enjoyed riding her bike a lot, going out with her friends, playing, and spending time with her family, especially with her mother, who described her as a very sweet girl.
She'd tell me daily, "Mom, I love you." She always has a smile, studious, because she was excelling in mathematics. She studied every day, all the time. She wasn't a girl you had to tell, Camila, get to studying. She did it on her own, you understand? She got rid of all this garbage. She took everything out. She took my whole life out because Camila didn't deserve that.
Borda brought a lot of joy to his home with his much-anticipated birth on September 18, 2006 in Juanin, Buenos Aires. He became part of the family that was composed of the marriage between Alejandra Barzabal and Roberto Dario Borda, who in addition to the baby had 6 other children. It was a pleasant home where the little ones grew up surrounded by family love and protection. However, time made sure that the relationship between the parents wore out in such a way that they decided that the best thing was to separate. The woman retained custody of the children while the man remained on the best terms to contribute to the line with maintenance and exercise healthy cohabitation. Time later, love knocked on Alejandra's door again. This after she met who would become the stepfather of Camila and the rest of her children. He was a good man who also had a daughter and was exercising his fatherhood as a single father. He answered to the name of Guillermo Modesti and was dedicated to the field of construction. The relationship they started soon became formal, and they started a new life in the Ricardo Rojas neighborhood of Junin. The place was actually a humble sector where precarious houses and unpaved streets abounded. Even so, the home of the new family located on Aria Street behind the door of number 1550. It would be endowed with joy, nice coexistence, union, and love also. In the same area lived Beatriz Borda, the sister of Camila's father. The woman had affection for all her nephews. However, she held a very special place in her heart for the 11-year-old girl. Considered a very sweet and playful young girl, in reality, that adorable personality only came to light if she was among her loved ones. since when someone outside her circle approached her, she subtly became introverted. Until shortly before the crime, everything seemed calm. The children had gotten used to their new home, but above all to the new members of the family, that is, Guillermo and his daughter. As a family, they soon adopted customs and tasks to fulfill at home. This involved cleaning and small responsibilities that the children could do, like for example doing the day's errands, like going to the store or some nearby place where their mother would send them. It was a small neighborhood. Most of the inhabitants knew each other, and therefore there was the security that the children could walk alone on the street, or at least that was believed. That's why parents often sent them to do some errands at the nearest store or usually to buy bread. This place was run by a young teenager named Milagros Alturia. The children were sent there when occasionally Alejandra and Guillermo asked for cigarettes. Particularly, Camila liked visiting this place a lot because in a very short time she had developed a nice friendship with Milagros. The path was not considered dangerous, as I repeat. It was a small sector where all the neighbors knew each other and greeted each other without any problem. But to get there, you had to go through the Paguelas estate, this place that before being occupied by the new neighbor had been a meeting point for children and adults, as I had already told you. The little ones would sneak off to play in the green areas while the men, and especially Guillermo, would illegally bring in their horses. It was an activity that had become very common among the residents, but with the arrival of the caretaker Jose Carlos, this was supposed to end. So by mid-November 2017, the worker was seen prowling around the front yard of the estate. What had initially been work matters now seemed like he was doing it for sheer pleasure. He used to sit looking out onto the street, trying to hide among the bushes so as not to arouse suspicion. The children who passed by there were already very well identified by him. Sometimes, in fact, the man took the liberty of kindly greeting them, or at least that's what he wanted to appear. Because apart from that, he became a sort of spy, observing the movements and habits of his neighbors who has children, what children live nearby, who pass by there more often. Unfortunately, Camila was one of the girls who lived a few meters from that address, so much so that sometimes they could exchange glances from one house to another, and it was just in this way that the girl had her first uncomfortable encounter with this monster. She didn't tell her mother, unfortunately, and her stepfather, but from that moment on, she talked to her brothers about how she no longer liked living there. Her discomfort was such, in fact, that she asked her mother to let her spend a few days at her dad's house, to which the woman saw no problem, because with the Christmas holidays, it would be good for her to enjoy the company of Roberto Borda. So the little girl went to her father's house located in the neighborhood called La Loma. They spent a couple of days together, not knowing that they were actually having their farewell as father and daughter, because the atrocious event that was about to take place was a very sad situation. Camila reunited with her siblings after the return to school was just around the corner. She had to prepare to take an exam due to the change of school year, and being so responsible, she hoped to be as well prepared as possible. Unfortunately, there was still the man who caused her so much discomfort. But not only to her, but to the other children in the colony for his short stay. Jose had already had a couple of problems with the nearby residents. Romina was a woman who lived a few meters from the fifth. With her also lived her sister, Myra, who in turn had a 3-year-old daughter named Lola. Previously, the women had already noticed strange behaviors in this individual. They saw him from a distance, spending much of his time working in the garden, glancing outside. However, they never imagined that the one who really caught his attention was the little 3-year-old girl. Lola was just a child, but somehow she found a way to communicate to her mother what was happening.
He spent his time working here in the field, wiring. 3 days ago, all I know is that the girl told me she was calling her, nothing more. To him,
Maid
signs to go to the place where he was working in the field in front.
of my house.
3 years?
Didn't you suspect anything?
No, because he was always working, looking, but he was always working like that, with a silly face.
This incident had taken place a few days before the tragedy. Undoubtedly, the perpetrator already had his sights set on the young girl who made his job difficult. Whether it was random or with full awareness of hurting Camila, who knows. But the truth was that with the presence of that individual there, all the minors were in danger. It all started on the afternoon of Sunday, February 25th, 2018. Alejandra was in the kitchen finishing up the cooking and realized that there was no bread left. She thought about sending one of her children to the store, and it seemed like a good idea that they also bring her a pack of cigarettes on the way back. "I'll go, Mom," the young girl said very enthusiastically, adding that it was best to go by bicycle to first get the bread and then the cigarettes in the shortest possible time, considering that the food was almost ready. So the little 11-year-old got on her bike, went through the door and pedaled away as fast as she could. It wasn't supposed to take that long, but Camila never came back. It is known that she arrived at the store where she stayed for a few minutes chatting with her friend. However, it was on her return that things got extremely murky, because just as she was pedaling in front of the Paguela's fifth, the caretaker, who was always usually aware of what was happening outside, suddenly came out to stop her. At that moment, her real nightmare began. Alejandra became worried and chose to search for her daughter herself. Guillermo and her other older children accompanied her, but when they saw that they couldn't find her anywhere, they decided to alert the other neighbors to join in the search. They hoped that with more people, they could cover more ground and find her as soon as possible, but Camila's trail seemed to have completely disappeared. It was just after 1 in the afternoon, and with no news, the mother of the family, in complete desperation at this point, went directly to the police station to make the corresponding report. Immediately after, officers Julieta and Brian left in their police unit to investigate the area. Perhaps they would find something that had been overlooked by both the neighbors and the affected family, and indeed they did. It was enough with a small recreation of the little girl's route from her house to the store to notice the still present bicycle tracks, which curiously stopped at the entrance of the villa. Immediately afterwards, the officers shouted for the door to the villa where Jose Carlos lived to be opened and spent a few minutes in complete silence, but no one doubted that the girl was inside. Along with the uniformed officers were the neighbors, whose mood was not exactly the most peaceful given the situation. In fact, in the absence of a response from the suspect, people began to show signs that they would enter by force. Things were about to get out of control. The man, not knowing how to react, found no other solution than to end the girl's life, and once he did that, he left the house with his torso uncovered and a rather Machiavellian face. "I'm the landlord at your service," he asked in a complete state of calm, but putting up some resistance to the authorities crossing the railing to inspect the area. However, there was nothing that could prevent the agents from entering to search for the missing person. The next step was to keep Jose under surveillance while other investigators went into the Paguela's property. They carefully inspected every corner of the home, hoping for some trace of the little girl. The first thing that appeared was the bicycle. That was the signal that brought the worst thoughts to the minds of the authorities and the neighbors who had also entered to cover more space. It was only a matter of time before an officer put his hand on the doorknob of the restroom. He turned it without knowing what he would find, and when the door was wide open, his eyes couldn't believe what was in front of them. It was Camila's body, severely injured, with a bag over her head, her hands tied and a cable around her neck.
How did we become this? The neighbors all went crazy.
We began wreaking havoc. Indeed, one boy hit the guy.
The transfer of the suspect to the police unit just began, and all the people outside started throwing stones at him, managing to injure him in some parts of his body. However, in the midst of the scuffle, the mother of the deceased girl also ended up getting hit. The collective mood exploded in such a way that 2 patrol cars ended up being set on fire. There were riots and the need to use force to intimidate the community members, who completely out of their minds attacked the uniformed officers and the forensic services that had come to collect the body. A total of 10 people were arrested at the time, in addition to the homicide suspect, who in the midst of the brawl was taken to the police station. His statement, he didn't remember anything that had happened. According to the man, he had seen the girl at some point in the afternoon, but after that his mind was completely blank, obviously very conveniently, because what he did meant nothing more than certain life imprisonment. Feigning dementia was his optimal choice.
I hope he doesn't pretend to be insane, as he's not at all, because you don't need to be to pretend it, in my view.
When Camila was coming back from the store then, the criminal already had everything meticulously planned. Perhaps he had seen her pass by when she was just leaving, so on her return he was already waiting for her with an argument prepared to invite her in. Once in contact with her, he had no problem subduing her and dragging her into the property, and what followed was a desperate struggle. The little one kicked, scratched, and tried to escape as much as she could, and it was finally in the second-floor bathroom where he proceeded to take advantage of her and snatch her from this world. The existing evidence against the suspect practically gave him a guilty sentence. However, the man did everything he could to feign insanity and be considered as imputable, but it only took a few psychiatric exams to conclude that he was in his full mental faculties. In addition, the support of the neighbors for the family created a kind of pressure on the authorities not to overlook the crime, let alone be lenient with the punishment. All the people in the neighborhood came together to march and demand justice. Meanwhile, the investigators continued to delve into the defendant's past. Who was this such aberrant individual? Well, what they discovered left them speechless. Jose Carlos Varela was not only introverted and quiet, but behind his unfriendly face hid an absolutely perverse truth. He was a lover of the little ones. This can be confirmed after his cell phone was confiscated, where he kept his darkest desires and most sinister fantasies. He had 3 Facebook profiles which he used to store content of minors, and had a large number of accounts of little ones in order to have access to their profiles. And this is how such repugnant behavior only paved the way for the theory that his crime was not an isolated event or an episode of some mental imbalance that would be forgotten later, but that he was simply a guy with evil at such high levels that possibly in his past he hid some other victims. While serving preventive prison, he was formally accused of taking life doubly aggravated by cruelty, treachery, and criminal motive related to intimate abuse. Pursuing a life sentence, there were psychiatrists involved in the case who put an end to his theater of madness. The man was completely sane at the time of the acts. Once then legally accountable, the trial proceeded and subsequently the sentence was read on November 15, 2018. As
the criminally responsible author of the crimes of qualified sexual abuse, having been committed through carnal access in real competition with doubly qualified homicide by its commission through allegory and crime and cause.
These last 2 qualify as in ideal competition.
the family approached and the perpetrator listened attentively to the judge, who was reading what would be justice for Camila, then proceeding to the long-awaited sentence, over a year, life imprisonment. However, not even a whole life in prison is obviously going to be able to return happiness to the family that lost one of the reasons why their home vibrated with joy. If you like this type of cases or paranormal horror, things like that, now I have a podcast called Many More Mysteries that will be appearing down here. It's available on audio platforms, YouTube and Facebook.